Session 13, What Neuroscience Confirms Scripture Always Knew. Welcome to Session 13. I am Rich Abbott, The Steward's Mind, Week 3, Session 3 of 5. Over the last two sessions, we have looked at the mechanics of how the mind changes and what we are up against in the pattern of the world. Today I want to do something I find genuinely exciting, and I hope you will too. I want to show you how what neuroscience has discovered in the last 30 years is a confirmation, not a contradiction, a confirmation of what Scripture has said for thousands of years about the mind, about change, and about the renewal that produces transformation. I am not a scientist. I am a pastor and theologian who has spent decades in the Word and the last several years reading everything I could find about how the brain actually works. And what I found was not tension between faith and science. What I found was remarkable convergence. Part 1. The discovery of neuroplasticity. For most of the 20th century, the settled scientific consensus was that the adult brain was essentially fixed. The neurons that you had were the neurons you had. The connections that were formed in childhood were largely permanent. You could learn a new information, but the underlying architecture of the brain, the deep patterns of thought and response, those were considered essentially unchangeable after a certain age. That consensus began to shift in the 70s and collapsed entirely by the 1990s. Through advances in brain imaging technology, particularly functional MRI, researchers could observe the living brain in real time, and what they observed changed everything. The adult brain is not fixed, it is plastic, meaning it retains the capacity to change, to form new connections, to reorganize its own structure in response to experience, attention, and repetition. This capacity persists across the entire lifespan. You can build new neural pathways at 30, at 50, at 70. The rate of change may differ, but the capacity does not disappear. This is neuroplasticity, and it is a scientific language for what Paul called the renewing of the mind. Part 2. Hebbian learning and repetition. One of the foundational principles of neuroplasticity is sometimes summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. This principle, associated with the psychologist Donald Hebb, describes the mechanism by which repeated experience creates lasting change in the brain. Every time two neurons fire at the same time, the connection between them is strengthened. The more frequently they fire together, the stronger and more automatic the connection becomes. Eventually, the connection is so strong that activating one neuron activates the other automatically, without conscious effort. This is how habits of thought are formed. This is why a belief that has been reinforced over years becomes so automatic it feels like reality rather than a thought. The neural pathway is so well worn that the thought fires instantly below the level of conscious awareness. Now hear what this means for renewal. Every time you choose a new thought, a thought rooted in truth, in Scripture, in the reality of your identity as a steward, and you give it your attention, you are causing neurons to fire together that have not fired together in that combination before. You are beginning to build a new pathway. It is faint at first, barely there, but it is real. And every time you return to that thought, in declaration, in reflection, in deliberate attention, those neurons fire together again. The pathway strengthens. The connection becomes more efficient. The new thought begins to arrive faster, more naturally, with less effort. This is not wishful thinking. This is the documented mechanism of how minds change. And this is exactly what Paul described: renewing, making new, replacing what was worn with something freshly built. Part 3. The role of emotion. Here is something neuroscience has confirmed that is particularly relevant for financial transformation. Emotional experience accelerates the formation of neural pathways. Thoughts. Thoughts that are accompanied by strong emotion, positive or negative, are retained more deeply and more durably than emotionally neutral thoughts. The amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, signals to the rest of the brain, "This matters. Pay attention. Remember this." This is why traumatic financial experiences create such deep and persistent pathways. The loss, the humiliation, the scarcity. These were not just experienced intellectually. They were felt deeply. And the feeling drove the pathway deep into the neural architecture. It is also why declaration is more powerful than passive reading. When you say a truth aloud, when you feel the weight of it, when you mean it, when you allow it to land in your body as well as your mind, the emotional accompaniment accelerates the formation of the new pathway. The amygdala signals, "This matters," and the brain pays attention accordingly. This is why the Psalms are declarations, not propositions. Why the Hebrew tradition of speaking the word aloud, not just reading it silently, is built into the fabric of biblical practice. The ancients understood something about how truth takes root in the human person that neuroscience is now confirming in laboratory conditions. Part 4. The timeline of transformation. I want to address something that trips many people up in this process. Transformation takes longer than you want it to. The new pathway is real from the first repetition, but it takes sustained, consistent reinforcement before it begins to feel natural, before the new thought arrives first, before the old automatic response loses its grip. Research on habit formation suggests that meaningful neural consolidation, the point at which a new behavior begins to feel more natural than the old one, typically requires somewhere between 60 and 90 days of consistent practice. Not willpower sprints, not occasional effort. Consistent daily engagement with the new pattern. This is not discouraging if you frame it correctly. 60 to 90 days is not a long time to renovate the neural architecture that has been running your financial life for decades. It is remarkably short, actually, given the depth of the grooves you are replacing. And the process is not linear. Some days the old pathway fires loudly and the new one is barely audible. Other days, usually after a period of consistent practice, there is a moment of recognition. The new thought arrived first. The old response did not fire automatically. Something has shifted. Those moments are the evidence of renovation in progress. Do not miss them. Name them. Record them. They are your evidence collection, proof that the process is working. Part 5. reflection. Today's reflection is a practice log. Beginning today, I want you to keep a simple daily record. Each day write down one declaration you spoke, one old pathway thought you intercepted, and one piece of counter evidence, one moment, however small, where the new pattern showed up. You are not performing for an audience. You are building a record of a mind being renewed, and that record, reviewed over weeks and months, will be among the most powerful evidence collection you have done. Closing declaration. Say this: my mind is changing, physically, structurally, really changing. Every declaration I speak is a pathway being built. Every true thought I reinforce is a connection being strengthened. I am not hoping for transformation. I am cooperating with a documented, real process. The Word always knew what science is now confirming, and I am living proof that minds can be renewed. This is Rich Abbott. This is The Steward's Mind. Session 14 is next.